Welcome to Setting the Bar, a Workbar podcast. I'm Maddie.
I'm Sarah.
And we're back, baby. Season
We are
3.
back, baby.
It's so good to see you.
You too. I love you and miss
I really
you.
miss being here. I love
I know.
these chit-chats that we do for this podcast because we get to interview and have amazing conversations.
We do.
With ladies like these. Please introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Alison Campbell. Thrilled to be here. I feel like maybe we need to do a high five.
No.
I know.
Going
We have
here.
like teams. We have teams. Yeah.
That's the kind of energy we like.
I'm the founder of unBurnt. Again, thrilled to be here today.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Danielle Hartigan. I am a professor at Bentley University, and I'm executive director of our Center for Health and Business there. And it's really fun to come talk about some research we've been working on. And thank you for having us.
Oh, thanks for being here. We are so excited to talk about this research. As usual, we were chatting a little bit before we started recording, and there's just so much to say about burnout, motherhood. I can't wait to hear more about the research that you guys did. So let's dive in.
Yeah, let's dive in. First, tell us how you two found each other, because that's what Maddie and I always love to uncover in these podcasts. We find it like very Boston to figure out how people find and connect with one another. So tell us sort of the background of that story before we get into your work, the publications, and all the really great things you guys are doing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I went to Bentley.
Oh, okay.
Graduated in 2007. And when I founded my company, I reached out and I was just trying to get a lay of the land between the Center for Women in Business,
Yes.
which was just a tremendous resource when I was a student, career services. I was just kind of reaching back into the university to kind of figure out like, hey, I'm an entrepreneur now.
Yeah.
What do you got?
Let's
do
talk.
something.
And in meeting with a few folks at the Center for Women in Business, I started sharing some ideas for research and just a little bit more about what I was seeing and hearing, really observing about burnout with leaders in the greater Boston area and with all clients that I was working with. And immediately I saw a light bulb go off one day on a Zoom call.
Yeah.
And the executive director at the Center for Women in Business said, hang on, you have to meet Danielle. She's done a ton of research. She's heading up the Center for Health and Business. So Danielle, I'll let you tell the other half of the story.
And I was going to
Yeah.
say, I think from our first conversation, they're like, you have to meet this alum. She's got this amazing new company, and she's they knew I did a little bit of work in my medical side on burnout. And I think our first conversation, we had already launched into our, 2-year plan for what we wanted to study and
amazing.
explore and the research questions. And so it's been really fun and one of the most fulfilling things, certainly about the past year of getting to do this work. And
Yes, excellent. It
Work
was an
with
excellent
Alison.
match, and the partnership. Yeah, it's been a ton of fun, and just really exciting to see the findings, the results starting to
Yeah.
come to life. We're having really great conversations with leaders, so excited to share more today.
Yeah, so are we. It like reminds me of a story of when you meet like the perfect person you want to spend your life with, and you're like, the date just lasted forever.
Yeah.
We named our children by the end of it. Allison, we've had you at Workbar and Lunch and Learns, and you did such a great job sort of getting out there and advocating on behalf of unBurnt. But tell us the story of how you founded it, because I think it's so interesting as somebody who worked for some of sort of the biggest companies here in Boston, including Wayfair, and you have such an interesting background and led to, I don't want to spoil the story, but like a hospitalization and then
Yes.
all this kind of really interesting things that it's very organic how unBurnt came about. You didn't sit around saying, oh, I want to found a company. You sat around and said, this is like something I experienced, I feel really passionate about. So give us like a little bit of your background and how unBurnt came to be.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think building unBurnt really, as you said, it came out of really personal, raw experience. I think, building what I wish existed. But
Yeah.
I spent nearly 20 years in a variety of corporate roles, from finance early on as an analyst on Wall Street, talk about burnout, even at 22.
Yeah, you were an investment. You came out of college wanting to be an investment banker.
Yes,
Wow.
and so I was in finance. I was in the hustle and bustle. At every stage of my career, I'll say I really enjoyed the work.
You did.
So, there's this interesting sort of dichotomy of really enjoying what you're doing, loving the work, loving the teams you're working with,
Yeah.
and at the same time, like pushing way past the point of exhaustion. And that was a pattern that repeated throughout my career. So, from investment banking to merchandising to e-commerce at Wayfair, as you mentioned, every stage I loved working with teams to identify new opportunities, kind of building from the ground up.
Yep.
Continue to, lead new initiatives. In my last role at WorkHuman, I was the chief of staff to the CEO. I was
Right.
heading up strategy and analytics. Seemingly made it, right? Like
Right.
on
That's what
paper,
success looks like.
on
Yes.
paper, you kind of feel like I checked all the boxes. I'm in the room at the table where I always envisioned I'd be able to be, not only to have the title, but to drive impact, right? So as one of the only women in the room, I think in that last stint, not only was I pushing so hard because I was continuing to look at those external factors of validation, right? The titles, the promotions, but I also felt this inherent responsibility to bring other women along for the journey, right?
Yes.
Leading strategy and analytics, again, often in a room of engineers, architects, data analysts, and, mostly men.
Of course.
And so wanted to bring other women into those conversations, mentor other young women coming into STEM-related fields, within WorkHuman, but, more broadly in Boston as I was doing some mentorship. So I think that's where I almost allowed the burnout to perpetuate.
It was something bigger than yourself that you were
You felt like you were
driving.
almost like giving back, like putting your time in.
And so as a result, as women, we smile through that, right?
We do.
We feel this immense responsibility to our teams, our children, sort of everyone in our lives. We put ourselves last. And so I did that for a period of months and months. And was feeling really unwell until I landed in the hospital, as you mentioned, and had this burnout-driven health scare. I was told in the emergency room I had to have surgery. And that was really the wake-up call that changed everything. Like, this has become completely unsustainable, not just how I'm working and experiencing life, but sort of the systemic factors around me. I started to slowly realize were not really setting anybody up for success. And so that was kind of that light bulb moment.
Yeah, I remember I was listening to either a podcast or maybe it was at one of the lunch and learns you did at one of our locations where you were talking about how it was during COVID and you were one of the people out in the workforce who had to quarantine before you got on an international flight and on the way home and show your vaccination records and do all of this stuff that was layered on top of your job and added to the stress. And you have 2 young kids at home. You have a husband, you have a family, you have so many different obligations. And just, it was almost, COVID doesn't sound like it was a catalyst for this hospitalization, but it certainly sounds like all of this just came about at once. And it was almost lucky that, okay, so this now I'm going to stop and pivot and go towards a different path that's probably more sustainable for you in the long run and have a deeper impact on, especially if you have if you want to help women, and it's okay to be unburnt. It's okay to sort of like stop and say, this is
too
not
much.
healthy.
Right.
It's not healthy. It's not sustainable. And I slowly started realizing in recovery, I'm not the only one. There's so many people that are feeling this way, that are struggling. And unfortunately, it's this silent suffering, right?
Yeah.
Folks don't necessarily feel like it's safe enough. You can be vulnerable enough to share it, right? Because we're in this really intense job market, and it just feels like the world is spinning faster and faster every single day.
Absolutely.
And so as a result, folks are suffering in silence and kind of just gripping on for dear life.
And I think as women, there's that additional pressure of like, you got your seat at the table. This is what we've been asking for, quote unquote. I'm here. I need to be grateful. I need to show that I can do it without, quote unquote, being too emotional. All of these things that are perfectly human aspects to get tired from working too hard and to feel some deep emotional and physical stress. Feels like you almost can't give yourself that because you'll lose the opportunity as a woman. And I'm so grateful for women like you guys who are saying like, no, we can actually still be super successful, keep our seat at the table, and also not have a total mental, physical breakdown.
It's almost like you read when you are at the stage where you're having children and some people are making decisions, should I stay home or should I put my kid in daycare? And it's like, well, it's not the cost of daycare you should think about. It's sort of the long-term effects of leaving the workforce and then getting back into the workforce. And this is the earnings over your lifetime that you're sacrificing. And it's like, whoa, slow down.
Yeah.
I just want to like figure out what's best for me and my family. And it's almost like we don't have an opportunity to do that because we're always in the back of our head, like, what am I sacrificing on the tail end of this? How am I going to recover this? And so I feel like the minute we enter the workforce, we start thinking about not only our career, but our lifetime in terms of like families. The clock is already going.
Totally.
Absolutely.
My husband actually asked me, are you going to tell that story about when you first started at Bentley? So indulge with this idea.
Yes, you are.
Because, all right, so I'm 30 years old, but, I had done a PhD and a postdoc and finally got, as my family likes to joke, my first real job. Yes. Right, I was an assistant professor, and the president at the time invited me to a Center for Women in Business event. And it was a nighttime event. I'm like, okay, this is hard. Who's going to, pick up my young daughter? She was 1.5 at the time. Who's going to pick her up from daycare? So we do all that. We figure all that out. And I'm sitting at this event listening to this brilliant woman give this awesome talk about, what we give as women in the workplace and what we lose and what we might miss. And my husband texts me a video of my daughter taking her first steps.
Unbelievable.
And I was like, the irony of it was just amazing that I was actively, and, I had gone because I didn't want to say no to this invitation, and I wanted to get to know my colleagues, and I was so excited to, lean in that moment and missed, a big moment. But I don't regret it, but it was just so funny of like, this is the real thing that we're giving up when we want to stay late at night to make those better connections with colleagues, or, we have to travel for work.
Right.
Yeah.
Like that.
So emblematic of working motherhood.
That is wild.
That is
I
wild.
told you
It's
that
the whole
story.
thing.
No.
That is wild.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, that's like the best.
I know.
Well, you can't make that up. I have to
can't
text
make
someone
that
back
up.
in the day.
Movie scene.
That is like a movie scene. Yeah.
And it's hard because she took more steps and you get to be at so much. And I think it's another pressure you put on yourself as a mom is to be there for every moment, just like you're putting your pressure on yourself to be there for every moment of work. It's not sustainable.
A lot of it is, we talk about this a lot in the work I do now with unBurnt, but there is a mindset shift as well, right? I think we came up in the era where it was, you can have it all, right? There's this pinnacle of balance, and you can, as a woman, really lean into your career, be the perfect mom. And
It's
so
a lie.
out the
It's a lie.
gates, we were not set up for success, right? We were set up to fail.
Right.
And so some of it is a mindset shift, right? How am I showing up today based on what I have? If things get messy and it's not the perfect week, because by the way, what is that even ever?
There's no such thing as autopilot. That's what I say to
There
myself
isn't.
every week.
Yeah, that's
I
a
can
good-
plan and all the meals, all the schedules, all the digital calendars in my kitchen and everybody. Okay, so on Sunday night, y'all know what you're doing. And it's like, there's no such thing as autopilot.
No such thing.
that's such a
And
good
then
point.
when things inevitably go off track, if they do in a given week, it's just about getting back on track.
It's
and
about
giving
getting back
yourself
on
that
track.
grace. And so I think that's a mindset shift that is really helpful. Something that I've really leaned into in this next chapter in my career and my life.
Now, so going back to that for 2 seconds, as we think about what we went through and balance and you can have it all, and this is like, the women before us paved the way and get out there and work your bones off. What do you think about the generations coming into the workforce now? What's going on? You see them at Bentley all the time, right? Like, do you think that they are going to have more sort of boundaries than we had and say no and have that, my life is just as important as, because it's interesting. Maddie and I used to talk a lot about how I came from the world of, I stayed at a corporate job for 15 years. I didn't have any side hustles. I gave my heart and soul to that company. Maddie comes in to work at Workbar. She has cushion careers, as we call them,
Right.
but side hustles
Yep.
and all these different things going on. And as a leader, I had to like sit back and say, that makes Maddie a better employee because she's being creative at Workbar, but she's also pursuing these other passions that are really important to her. So she comes as like her whole self to work. That's super important for me as a leader and for Workbar as a company and the work she's doing here. But it's something I had to get used to as somebody who did not grow up that way. So tell me more about like the generations rising into the workforce and how, and what you think that's going to look like, as opposed to like how we all came into it, trying to balance it. And P.S., there's no such thing as balance.
Yeah, I mean, I see this. I've kind of got two answers for you. One,
Yeah.
I think one of the great things that's happened is kind of a destigmatization of mental health and being vocal about it. So, I have students say to me, I'm having a really rough week. I need an extra few days on that assignment. I'm taking a mental health day, or, I can't come to that event because I'm having a meeting with my therapist. And, the fact that they're even being vocal about these things means they're vocal with me, they're vocal with their friends. There isn't a stigmatization around seeking help and counseling. I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
I worry a little bit about the interpersonal dynamics. So many students, again, one of my favorite things is when I first started teaching, I would love at the beginning of class, students are talking to each other, they're engaging, they're meeting each other. And, what I see a lot now is down on their phones,
right.
Not really, even when they're in the same room, not really connecting. And so, we know there's a loneliness epidemic.
Yep.
So while I'm not sure, to be honest with you, I think I'm happy that employers, I think, are addressing this more and more. But, as we've seen and as you've seen, a lot of it is still lip service, right? So we can destigmatize it.
Interesting.
We can say, here's the resources we're providing, but unless there's really true systemic change in how these things are being addressed, even, the most open employee that's willing to, kind of disclose and share, if that's not appreciated in the workplace, it still might be a problem.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is about fit too. Like, I was lucky at that time in my career to be working for you, where you were at a place where you could say, like, okay, this is actually a good thing. I want to see my employees doing this. If I was working somewhere else, that might not have been the case, and I would not have been able to keep my job. I would have had to find something else. So I think that for the younger women, or the younger generation in general, they're aware of that a little bit more. Like, whereas we came up like, okay, you get a job, this is where your job is.
Right.
You got to stay there, you got to gut it out. Now it's like, well, I could do this job at 50 different places.
Yeah.
And I'm going to find a place where I can do it, where I can love the work, love the team, like you were talking about, but also not feel like I'm putting myself at risk. And I think there's so many reasons for that. That's a whole separate
there's
podcast.
and honestly, it makes me think also, which you and I used to talk about, the quiet quitting, and that can lead us into your publication, your white paper that you guys collaborated on, which there are so many things I want to get into about this white paper because I think it's so interesting. And I feel like it like tickled my brain because for myself, I always think about, I have to like shut my brain down because I'm not innovating when I'm doing all of the things. Right. So I have days, and I've started to structure my days where Kara and Maddie know this very well. After 3 p.m., do not even attempt to put me in a meeting because like the brain is squishy and I don't make good decisions. Like, it's what we say to our kids. Are you making a good decision? I know when I'm not making a good decision. But can you guys talk to us? Like, let's like kick off a little bit about the publication. Yeah. What is in it? What it's telling us, how you're trying to educate everybody. I'm not sure how you want to kick it off because there's so many good parts of it. So you guys lead me down this path.
Yeah, I think we'll tag team a little bit here.
Yeah.
So really the premise was trying to understand what's happening in today's modern workplace, right? We have hybrid dynamics. I know we're going to talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah.
We've got AI implementation. We've got, pilots and all of this transformation that's not only affecting the workforce in terms of role shifting, but it's also changing the shape around entire departments. We've seen in the headlines week after week companies leaning into AI technology infrastructure at the expense of people.
Right.
And so with all of these dynamics sort of in flux right now, we were really curious to understand what are the current drivers of workplace friction?
Yes.
Can we understand, can we kind of quantify what some of those conditions look like, its impact on burnout, its relationship to overall well-being? Is there a relationship to perceived stress? So we can talk about that a little bit. But then what's the downstream impact to companies, right? Because it doesn't have to be an either-or proposition. I think so often we get into this, very binary conversation around well-being or results, right?
Yeah.
The really empathetic leader is more focused on people than they are driving outcomes. And what we're finding is that's not necessarily true. But also, if we set the conditions for folks to do their best work, how does that impact innovation and then long-term company performance? So we found some really interesting things. Danielle, I'll tag you in.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is important too when we're talking about concepts like burnout, like innovation. I've done a lot of work on empathy. As a researcher, and as a social psychologist, my gut is to say, well, what exactly are we measuring here? So one of the important things we did in this research was when we're talking about burnout, we're talking about work-related burnout on a validated burnout inventory, the Copenhagen burnout inventory. We're not necessarily just talking about general stress or personal well-being, right? We're talking about something very specific about burnout around your work in the workplace. And similarly with innovation, a lot of the measures of innovation, including one we used called the Innovation Work Behaviors Scale, really just measure visible activity around innovation. And what we were interested in, and what Alison in particular and unBurnt have looked at, is this idea of capacity for innovation. It's exactly what you mentioned, that 3 p.m., can I really think about complex tasks? Am I putting aside the grind, the visible activity to really focus on something that's strategic and sustainable? And so in the research, we actually measured visible activity of innovation and this idea of innovation capacity as separate constructs, and looked at the relationship of burnout and these two constructs. And again, that's somewhat, there's some other studies and research that has examined burnout and innovation, but I think that was a pretty unique and important contribution. And what we found actually kind of blew us away. So I'll let Alison share.
Yeah.
But we were looking at this scale and these results and just saying, wow, there's a clear narrative there that was kind of exciting. So I'll let you. I'll give you the punchline.
It's super exciting. And I think at the same time, when we sat back, we were like, this makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
So, the punchline, we were looking at how does burnout impact this kind of split, right? The short-term activity, the visible signs of activity. Am I coming to the meetings? Am I responsive? Am I generating ideas, right? That can signal innovation.
Right.
But what we saw was that long-term capacity to really translate those ideas into durable value.
Yeah.
That second piece really started to decline when burnout was high.
Okay.
Right? But the interesting part was that activity also seemed
Right.
high. So it really dispels this myth that burnout only looks like disengagement. That, when folks are completely overwhelmed, when they're maxed out, they're shutting down. What this is showing us is that actually it's probably your high performers, right? It's the doers. It's the folks that are still showing up, answering the emails, on Slack instantaneously when they get the message,
Right.
who are quietly burning out.
Right.
And at the same time, there's that quiet depletion of that long-term capacity. So yeah, really blew us away. Really, really interesting. And at the same time, I think makes a lot of sense in the context of today's modern
Totally makes
world,
Yes.
let alone workplace.
Because I keep thinking when you want something done, ask a busy person to do it. You're already overloading the
Right.
people who get shit done.
Yes.
So, but those people, and like from when I was reading your white paper and I was thinking about myself, and I was like, this is why I'm so just intentional about like, is that a word? About intentional. I said intentional. Intentional. about freeing my brain space and not looking at my phone or not thinking about or delegating or doing all these things where it frees up my brain to then think about strategic, bigger picture things that I want to think about,
Yeah. I think, like you said, it is shocking, but also not shocking. Like when you say it out loud like that, it's like, that actually makes a lot of sense. And I think all the women in here are very likely overachieving, high-performing people who can say anecdotally, I've experienced that. It's like you're feeling so drained and so tired, but you have a meeting, and I'll be damned if I'm not going to show up to that meeting with the next great idea.
Yeah.
And I think there's always kind of that thought in the back of your head that's like, okay, after this project, I can decelerate.
Yes.
After this push, I can focus on my health. And, when you are high performing, when you are overachieving, you're just like, one more thing.
It's like those dopamine hits too. Like people
Totally.
saying, good job, that's great.
Right,
It's like,
you're like,
you
okay,
live for those
that's worth
dopamine.
it. Right,
Yeah, that
totally.
dopamine. But at the same time, it's like, okay, don't give me the dopamine because then I'll keep doing this stuff that doesn't put me at my potential. I want to work at my potential.
Right.
I strongly believe nobody wants to come into work to do a bad job. I think they want to come in to do a really good job. And as leaders, it's our job to make sure that they can, reach their full potential. But so when I think about, again, myself, why aren't more companies measuring this? You guys have uncovered sort of, it's almost like something that we've been gatekeeping, but why aren't leaders talking about this? Why isn't this a metric on my KPI list? Like,
Yeah, it's a good question.
then how do I change?
Yeah. I think, we can both chime in here. I think it's a whole knotty, complex system, right? And so the first piece is it's easy to track the visible signs of activity. Maybe not easy, that's the wrong word, but that's sort of what's baked into performance structures and the way we measure productivity, right? Are we counting number of tickets closed? And, that's a very
Terrible.
transactional example. But, those are things that we can set up a quota and we can measure, did you meet it or not? When we're talking about capacity, we have to actually take a step back and start measuring different signals. And so the first piece is our workplaces are designed, we were talking about this before we started hitting record, they're still 9 to 5. There's still inherent, structures that have been set up since the industrial factory line revolution.
Right.
And so, understanding how we flip the Rubik's Cube and start measuring new signals is something that is part of a change curve that we need to educate leaders on and also be able to demonstrate the value of why that's important, right? What is the outcome? What is the benefit, for the company as well as the leaders, the teams, the employees? And so I think we're at the beginning now of having this new potential framework to have different signals, to measure capacity and to, quite frankly, make that business case. But Danielle, I'll let you.
Yeah, and I think, again, kind of putting on my social psychology research hat, one of the things that I think people overestimate their ability to kind of pick up the burned out employee, right? As a manager, you might say, I know who's at risk for burnout. I know who's experiencing burnout. And our research and other research suggests that actually you might not be as good at it as you think, and you might be missing these underlying signs because people are really good at masking. They're really good at appearing productive, especially if they're, doing a lot of important things, but maybe putting off those more complex tasks or avoiding the strategic, long-term, innovative.
Is that what you call like degraded work?
Yeah, and I think as one kind of maybe simpler takeaway from this is managers can begin to appreciate that they might need extra tools or extra measurements to be able to identify who's at risk or who's experiencing burnout, because you can't always tell from those output metrics that we currently have. And so, I would encourage more tools and resources to help managers recognize and respond to burnout in their employees, and encourage them also to be able to think about how to have those conversations effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And Maddie, you mentioned the I'll relax when, right? I will take the break after this next push. And the challenge is that we're incentivized to keep reaching for that next, big thing, right? Our compensation, our reward systems inside of organizations are tied to this kind of high output. You've got to perform, you've got to show up. And, these structures that don't really bake in the period of recovery, which ironically would likely help power that next wave of innovation that would power, a more sustainable long-term performance curve for more employees. It's just not baked into how we work, right? We're on to the next. Yeah. I talk to leaders and teams where there'll be a huge deliverable, a big sprint. Maybe it's a new feature that just launched and it's a tech company. It's barely mentioned, right? We're not even celebrating these milestones. We're just on to the next.
Right.
And so when that's the structure and then you're incentivized to reach for that next promotion because that means more money, we're incentivized to want to keep going.
I hesitate to even ask this question because I'm afraid the answer will be against what I think is right when it comes to remote work versus hybrid versus full-time in office. But do you think these problems have gotten worse because of remote work? Because there's less face-to-face time where people can really say like, ooh, she doesn't, like her physical energy doesn't look good. Like
the lines are blurry almost.
The lines are blurry. It's like I show up to a meeting looking rough because I'm home, whether I'm burnt out or not.
Yeah.
Is that hard for a leader to judge?
I'm going to go back to our data, and we did have about half of our workforce was in office. About a third was hybrid, and then the rest were fully remote.
Yep.
And we did not see differences.
Interesting.
Good. I think the signs and the cues that leaders and managers might need to look for in employees go deeper than what you're talking, the kind of physical cues,
stuff.
the obvious cues to stress or anxiety or, checking out.
Right.
And so, I think maybe the training looks different for managers to how to spot things if you're, talking to a fully remote employee versus how to spot something by the water cooler. Right. But I don't think the problem, at least in our data and at least in what I've seen so far, I don't think it's unique to either kind of work environment.
So interesting.
And in fact, one of the things we want to tackle next is the kind of caregiving burden and how that might play a role in this. And, I think if anything, the kind of lack of flexibility in the workplace is probably going to drive this even more because, if you have limited time and bandwidth because of caregiving responsibilities and you can't work 80 hours a week.
Right.
You can't stay late. You can't come in early. In that time that you are there, you better get that visible activity going, right?
Right.
And so those people might be even more at risk for.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
But I could see it going the way you're saying, but at least in our data that didn't play out like that, which is probably a good thing.
That is a good thing. Yeah. I believe in remote work. Yeah, I believe in it.
I think that's, sort of the trade-off, and it's very contextual based on the business, based on the employee population, and I think it really also points to some of what we saw in the data as well. There can't be a one-size-fits-all solution.
That's right.
There is not a persona of an employee that looks burnt out. It looks, very different depending on if they're completely withdrawn and they have both no capacity and they're not showing any signs of activity.
Yeah.
That was a very different persona in our data set than the folks that were actively showing up, responding, generating ideas, but then not having capacity when they were in very high burnout.
Right.
And so, it really can't be this one size fits all.
Yeah, I think that's important to recognize as, at Workbar, we talk about that a lot as well, which is why, our spaces are activity-based and purpose-driven, all that kind of good stuff, because just like people aren't one size fits all, their workspace shouldn't be one size fits all, and we shouldn't we shouldn't assume that what works for Maddie will work for Sarah in terms of what makes me productive and the environment that energizes me and, makes me do my best work. So I agree. And while I don't love fully remote work because I do love people who come into
Yes, it's
our
nice to
spaces
be.
and I do think you get a vibe and a different
sure.
energy coming into different spaces to work. I don't think you're going to reward the best people for the best outcomes by driving them into an office in downtown Boston from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday.
Right.
I love return to work because I think people should get out of their homes.
Yes.
I think sort of the loneliness epidemic is real. And we did a big study with a health and wellness expert for our spaces, very like ergonomic and the furniture and all this kind of stuff. But even, I've been the CEO of Workbar for almost 8 years, and I didn't realize, that people who are working from home who stare at the same white wall every day, how that's impacting them neurologically.
Yeah.
And just like little things like that I think are also really important. But yeah, kind of going back to even just driving innovation. And I always like to think about what I can do better as a leader and what people in Boston can do better to drive innovation in Boston, because that's become very important to Workbar's mission specifically, and providing support and resources to founders and to the startup community in general. If somebody were out there starting a company today, what would you guys recommend in terms of, especially the startup community, right? Like I would imagine burnout is pretty severe in that neck of the woods, just because they're running 24/7. What would you recommend in terms of not burning out and trying to get full capacity out of people who are working for startup companies?
Yeah, really big question. I think, so, first and foremost, if you're a founder, a leader, someone who has responsibility and agency, the ability
Yes.
to set the tone.
Yes.
I think it's about taking stock, first and foremost, building awareness around your own personal rhythm. So Sarah, you mentioned don't book a meeting after 3 p.m.
Oh, I know when I work best. But that didn't happen until my 40s, right?
Right.
Like I did not
built
know
awareness
that.
around your capacity and it's almost like breaking down and auditing your week, your days. When do I do my best work? How can I think about the different types of activities as a leader, as a founder, as the CEO that I need to be driving?
Yeah. You hear about decision fatigue a lot, right?
It's very real.
Yeah.
Lots of research around context switching and sort of this attention deficit, specifically now in the age of AI.
Yeah.
And so that could be a whole nother podcast. But
Yeah.
I think it is really, as a leader, first taking stock. How do I do my best work? How am I showing up as an emotionally regulated leader?
Okay.
So that I'm not escalating. I'm sort of bringing calm. I'm bringing steadiness to the situation, right? So that's kind of step one. And the same is true for any employee. How do I do my best work? What are my triggers? But we also can't say it's all on the individual, right? We have to set these systemic structures up for success. So if you're building a company and you have the authority to do that, that might look like baking in some rhythms within the week, the month, the quarter, where as a team, you're talking about capacity, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about the blockers. And so if it's a very small team and you're able to all be in one room or on one call, it's allowing that vulnerability. So as the leader, asking questions, not shying away from some things that might feel like, oh, but this might get in the way. We gotta move.
Right.
Actually taking a beat to figure out, what do I need to unblock? So often we kind of bulldoze right past those questions and those conversations for the sake of productivity.
I know I do. Yes.
And then I think it's about, we talked about this a couple times, but some of those recovery periods. It feels counterintuitive if you're a startup and you just raise capital.
Yep.
To think you could possibly take a beat, that you could possibly take time to slow down. But ironically, when you start to get into overdrive, as we've mentioned, you're not doing your best work. So I think it's about the proactive sort of planning and forecasting. How can we as a team build in milestones where we're celebrating wins, we're building in a little bit of recovery after a really big push, so that we can come back stronger. And that's hard to do in the midst of a busy month.
Right.
If you're in it, people say, I can't stop. But if you're proactively planning for it,
Yeah.
It's baked in, like any other meeting, any other big deliverable. You know those kind of rhythms where you'll be able to pull back, celebrate as
Right.
a team, and then have that sort of moment of recovery.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and I
love
think-
that.
I do too.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say the other thing that kind of played out a little bit in the research was this idea around unclear and uncertain
Yes.
roles and expectations, and both in our quantitative data in the survey, but also in qualitative open-ended questions where we ask people, what is one barrier to you being innovative, or what is something that really drives your best self at work? And all the themes centered around transparency and uncertainty. So wanting more transparency around goals, wanting less uncertainty about shifting of roles, and, you know, kind of in this world we're living in, again, with this kind of accelerated pace of AI implementation, of changing workforce, of, you know, first it's, you know, people are quiet quitting, and now people are, you know, trying to stay in the workforce and not leave, and now people are working more, and now people return to work hybrid. I think being incredibly clear as possible about why those things are happening, you know, even when things are out of your control, explaining that the uncertainty is there because of a reason, because you're all working towards a common mission or goal. And I take some of this from the work I've done in healthcare where, you know, you go in for a procedure, nothing in medicine is 100% certain.
Yeah.
There's
Right.
always risks. And, you know, doctors can, and healthcare systems aren't always set up to want to communicate about the uncertainty in procedures. They want to tell you everything's going to be fine, but they can't, right? Because they know
Right.
things are uncertain. But you as the patient are sitting there like, oh, and it's increased anxiety, increased stress because of the uncertainty. Whereas the best thing to say is to just acknowledge it head on.
Yes.
You know, we know AI is disrupting everything. And frankly, we wish we knew exactly what that was going to look like in 5 months or 5 years. But here's our goal, and we're committed to getting there, and we're committed to you, and we're going to work together on this. And those kinds of, you know, transparency and certainty about the uncertainty, I think, could be another
Yeah.
key way that leaders could communicate, you know, we know this is going to be hard, but
Right.
we're in this together,
Right.
kind of mentality.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all so interesting. And as you guys are talking, I'm thinking about this. You said about regulating at work and for leaders to regulate. And I think it's something we've talked a lot about at Workbar. I think it's something you do a really good job with, is bringing your whole self to work. And so often you see people, I want to say mostly men. Sorry, guys,
no,
but
it's
it's
your
true.
perception,
This is
so
my
it's your
perception,
truth.
yeah. But
What I say to my
have
10-year-old.
to, yeah, that's your truth. Yes, my truth is that it is mostly men will have this sort of like work persona that is really inflexible, not vulnerable. They feel like it's okay. Look, there are women. I've had women leaders do this too. So, but okay to speak disrespectfully to people who report to them, raise their voice, create a really intense environment because it's work. Well, I would never act like that with my family or with my friends. Well, why are you acting like that at work then? And you wouldn't have your kids or your partner kind of down some crazy push on anything without taking a break. Or
Yeah.
and I think part of bringing your whole self to work is also recognizing that how you behave at work and how you treat people at work is as important, if not more important, than how you behave in the rest of your life. I think about it from like a parenting perspective.
Well, how exhausting.
How
the two
exhausting.
personalities.
Yes.
But also to
Like, who
just
am I
feel
today?
like, right, yeah, but to also just feel like because it's work and because there are KPIs and results that you have to have, that you can behave a certain way
Yeah.
and not stay regulated.
Yeah.
Like there's so much more awareness around this in parenting in general, self-regulation, and helps your kids regulate. And it's so interesting to think about it at work because that's how those toxic work environments develop, because these leaders, or it doesn't even, not even just leaders, but people in general feel like they can just
Yeah.
be however they want because
Right.
it's work and I'm
Yeah.
driven.
Yeah.
And unfortunately can hide behind results, right?
Like, well, I got it done.
got it done. We hit the number. We closed the quarter. We
Right.
outperformed quota. Whatever
Right.
it looks like, that is sort of the excuse. that
Right.
other folks in the organization can say, well, we're excusing that bad behavior.
Right.
When we know that really empathetic, high EQ, leaders drive sustainable results,
Right.
over the longer term. And so I do think there is, again, that mindset shift that we're starting to see with leaders recognizing that it's okay. It is
Yeah.
exhausting to think you have to have work persona
Right.
and then rest of life persona.
Right.
Just like it's also exhausting to feel like you can't necessarily share what's going on or
Right.
ever have kind of a crack in the foundation that is
Totally.
that work persona. And so hopefully it's shifting and we're starting to see a little bit more of that softer side
Yeah.
be recognized as effective.
Right.
But yeah, I think it's unfortunately been a case in the past where it's the excuse making is because of results.
Right.
It's result
Totally.
driven. But in the, what leads back to your publication is that who knows what the results could have been.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, because you don't know what percentage of capacity your team is operating at. And if they're probably not operating at full capacity and what type of innovation they could have driven and the results could have been a lot better.
Yeah.
And changing that conversation around burnout so that it's viewed as more of a systemic problem, and that it's not actually often the fault of the individual employee. It may also not be the fault of the individual leader or manager.
Right.
That they're under a lot of pressure for specific outputs and
Right.
and specific metrics, and so
It's a vicious cycle.
I know.
and so some of that push from leadership onto employees, which, and let's not kid ourselves either, the leaders are burnt out as well.
Of course.
And, in our sample, we had, over 500 employees across all these different industries, and 86% were experiencing medium to high levels of burnout.
Oh my gosh.
Which, but it's, you're saying, oh my gosh, but a lot of the research suggests that upwards of, the majority of workers
Yeah.
have, some level of burnout, work-related burnout. And
Yeah.
so, this isn't, it's kind of like saying, okay, let's find the burnt out employees and give them some yoga classes.
Right,
It's
right.
just
That's
not
not
going to
it.
work.
That's
Because if
right.
86% of your workforce is experiencing burnout and having reduced capacity, but they're still going, they're
Right.
still there, they're still showing up, they're still generating ideas,
Not enough yoga in the world.
exactly.
It's got to be intentional. I mean, I think that correlates directly to what Workbar tries to do as well in terms of coming into our space and being productive and being happy and bringing your whole self in. It's got to be something that's very intentional and baked into the company, the design, all the way to the leader, to the person who's running the company. I really do. I published a series called The Carpool CEO, which I know how silly that sounds,
No,
but
I love it.
it's my attempt at saying to the world, like, I'm going to own this because I think it's important for me to own this as sort of a woman who's leading a business and running a family. Like, I create the Workbar network for my own personal use. So when I carpool my children, I have a place to go in and be productive and work all day. And that's how I get it done. But I try to open the curtain on that because I think it's important. And I just like this publication and how important this is. And as a company in Boston, who Maddie and I feel strongly about supporting companies in Boston, I'm so proud that this publication's coming out of Bentley and coming out of
Yeah.
unBurnt, because it just makes it's so great for companies in Boston to have access to this data and this information and everything you guys are doing to push it forward and get it out into the universe, because it can only help Boston innovators too, right?
Right.
Like, it really is a tremendous value to have to companies out there.
And, if we are an innovation hub, right, we want to be a place. And, Bentley's certainly thinking about this a lot as we train the next generation of innovative workforce.
Yes.
How do we put people out in the world to be not only innovators, but innovators in a way that fulfills their lives and their
Yes.
purpose.
Right.
And, and we know what works. We know that people who have stronger belief in the mission of an organization have better connections, whether that's in person or over a Zoom screen to colleagues. They're the ones that are most fulfilled and least at risk for kind of the detrimental effects of burnout. So I think, putting it all together, but also thinking about what are the policies at a company level, or, maybe as we're talking about Boston, even at a state level or a policy
Yes.
level, of how can we create a better workforce ecosystem that that drives innovation by reducing burnout.
And ultimately results. Like if the
Yes.
company wants results, which we all do, ultimately this actually is proven to drive bottom line results. So it's like everybody wins.
Yeah, I think, we're sort of rebuilding in real time, which is exciting. It's very
It's
daunting.
tiring.
It's tiring.
I'm
it's
burnt out
daunting.
thinking about it.
But we have a huge opportunity, right?
Yeah.
And so as we're thinking about how are we leveraging AI, not to just backfill with more, not to
No,
get
we
these
don't need more
productivity
slop out
gains,
there. Yep.
Right.
We have this moment to really think, particularly in Boston, as an innovation hub, as a leader in life sciences, technology, AI. How do we want to build this differently and make some decisions as leaders? I know certainly I went into this work with unBurnt. I don't want my kids working the way I was
100%.
working.
Right, I was just going to say, it's cool to think about, we were talking about at the beginning about like the leaders, the women who came before us paved the way, and eternally grateful for them because we do get seats at the table now. And now what can we do for our kids to pave the way for an even better outcome?
Yeah, and I think for the ecosystem to drive incredible results, we're already on the map, but continue to sort of double down on living here, working here as a place to drive innovation, but in a sustainable way, right? Like hopefully that's
Sustainable.
part of this next chapter, the next generation coming into the workforce. Folks are well and they're doing incredible work.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the goal. I recently published an article about my daughter has dyslexia and how in the world of AI, I think dyslexia is a competitive advantage because not only does she have sort of emotional intelligence that's off the charts, but she solves problems by not going in a linear path. And I think in the world of AI, that's really important. And so, I urge leaders to don't, just because AI says that this person is the right person for that job or they check all the boxes, like don't overlook people who think differently, act differently, do differently, because it does drive innovation. And we do want different people out there doing different work, having different types of jobs. And I think that this correlates very well to that as well. It's like, let's not just make all these assumptions. Just like don't assume the person that's working the hardest isn't burnt out. Because they probably are.
Right.
According to your research.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of it's very circular in that regard. So this is awesome.
I know. There's
I think
so
everybody. So where
much to
where
talk
can we
about, think
find your
about.
publication? Because we'll link it in the podcast notes. But where do we go to find you guys? Our audience, because I read it. It's really important. I actually have made 2 changes at Workbar since reading it.
Really?
I did.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
So
Would you share?
Okay.
All right, I'm sorry.
Okay, I will. Okay, one of
I
them
wanna
said, for our sales cycle, we don't take the foot off the gas, and it's like every month it starts. And so I was like, we should give everybody a break on the first of the month to like reset. Do you know what I mean? And not jump right back into it. Have some sort of like break where they can look forward to. And from a certainty perspective, they know it's coming, so they can push really hard at the end of the month, knowing that on the first of the month, it's like a day where they're not focused on sales. They're focused on other things.
so
and
great.
then I don't like working on, I like working on Fridays. I don't like Zooms on Friday, and I don't like meetings on Friday. I think of it as my admin day. So I started to block my calendar.
Yes.
I love it. These are great.
That's really
Yeah.
great.
Thank you.
Love
It's
it.
nice to sometimes hear how these things have an impact,
Yeah.
beyond the pages.
Yes.
But beyond
Yeah,
the, I mean, I
that.
think there's so many good, juicy parts. I said earlier, it like tickled my brain because I was like, yes, yeah. And I was like, that's why I think busy people get stuff done. That's why I think, and it's like,
Right.
But it's almost like you don't want to overload those people. There's so many good things.
I know. Well, I think these days there are so many different ways to do things, and there's more awareness around different ways to do things than ever before because of social media, because of media in general.
Yeah.
And we have access to global companies, global experiences, and that is all such a good thing.
My
But
daughter wanted to go to
sometimes-
Coachella.
Yeah, she's like, yeah,
I was like,
right.
how do you even know what that
Yeah,
is?
you're like,
Okay,
what?
yeah,
I didn't know what
continue,
Coachella
sorry.
was
Right.
when I was 12 years old. Yeah.
Like, what are we doing?
But right, exactly. So it's like all these things, but shoot, I lost my train of thought.
I know. I
Immediately. No, it's totally fine. I'm like, wait, let's talk about Coachella.
jumped
Like there's no upper limit. Like there's no. That's where I thought you were maybe going.
What was I even saying?
like we have
Something about
access
global
to-
experiences, and we have access to all of it in big companies.
Oh,
and, yeah.
yes. So we are aware of all of these things, but sometimes you do just still need to be told, like,
Yeah.
hey, you might not have thought of this yet. Even though we feel like we're thinking about everything and we've seen everything and we know all the different ways we can do things, sometimes you just need like the researchers to publish a paper that you're like, oh my God.
Like, I've been doing that. Yeah.
Right, like, whoa.
Yeah.
And so
I'm burnt out.
Right, I'm burnt out. Well, I think about when you did a lunch and learn at Workbar last May, and I don't want to be like hyperbolic and saying it was life-changing for me, but
Maddie
it was
came
a little
out
bit.
saying it was. Maddie
I
came
really
out saying
did.
it was.
I was like,
and I was
whoa.
like, you're so
She's
dramatic.
Like, yeah, she's like, can you calm down? And I was like, no, whoa. But I have thought about it, and I think about it all the time because there are just things you don't consider. They're just the normal parts of our everyday life. And for so many working moms, it is that just constant stress. And when you look at it in a different way, you're like, wow, I'm doing myself a disservice. Nobody is getting the best out of me. Mm-hmm. Not work, not my kids, and certainly not myself.
Yeah.
So it is, this work is just incredible.
The burnt out people in our survey all said, and they way more than the people that weren't burnt out, said, I'm doing a lot of things, but none of them well.
None of them well.
Right.
Yeah. And it just really resonated. And the difference between people reporting, and again, the highest levels of burnout, the lowest levels of capacity, saying that was shocking.
Yeah.
Right? Because it really does feel that way. But again, there's still that I'm doing a lot of things.
Right.
So nobody's looking at these people saying they're not doing anything, they're not achieving. Right. But it's this internal feeling of I'm not doing what I need to be doing. I'm not doing the complex things. I'm not doing enough. I'm not doing it well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think
God,
just
that's
having,
wild.
Yeah, it's crazy. And having just the opportunity to have that called out in a really scientific way, I think will move the needle a lot. Great. So
Plus,
thanks
May
for your
is
work.
Mental Health Awareness Month, so it's a great
Yes.
time for everybody to read this white paper.
Yeah,
and make
read this white
changes.
paper, take some of these key takeaways. Are there any sort of quick action steps that you guys could share
Kara's
for the
gonna kill
listeners?
you for going over time.
Am I over time?
No, but yes, let's do quick
Okay.
action items.
Just any quick action steps that are like any tool, like you mentioned earlier, some tools that you think about that like first step, try this.
Ooh, like the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, low hanging fruit.
I would say a daily energy check. It can be 10 minutes at the end of your day. It's taking stock. It's actually giving yourself a moment to wrap your workday, get that mental checklist out of your brain and maybe onto a piece of paper or into your Notion somewhere.
That's a good one, yeah.
And just do that check. How am I feeling? Like,
Yeah.
what's my energy, 1 to 10, before I show up, for my kids or
Right.
go into my evening with my partner? How am I feeling? And notice those patterns over time. If you're reporting 1 out of 10 energy for a couple of weeks, that might be kind of
Take a
enough
day
data to
Right.
signal that you're really, you're struggling, you're burnt out, and maybe you need to take a day off.
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe, the Copenhagen Burnout Inventory is available online, open access. You can find also the, in our white paper, kind of the items that were used. Take it. 7 items. Ask yourself, am I experiencing some of these things? And if I am I, is there something I'm doing every day that maybe I'm avoiding kind of the complex, the exciting parts, the strategic parts of my job that I actually love, because I'm just trying to go. And maybe, just some self-awareness, or even team awareness if you have a team to kind of say, how are people doing with that? Because there's really it's so common to be experiencing these things that there shouldn't really be a lot of shame in it.
Right.
Such a good one. I love
That's
that.
great.
Yeah,
Oh
those
my
are-
God.
those
I
are
love
both
that.
so
Was a
great.
great question, Maddie.
Glad I
it.
took up the extra time for it.
Well, thank you guys so much.
Yeah.
This has been amazing.
Thank
was
you.
incredible.
Appreciate
Thanks for
it.
joining us.
So important. Okay, bye.
Bye. That's it.